and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we start with some international news. Switzerland has finally said yes, or perhaps ja, to marriage equality.
No more neutrality in Switzerland. They've made a choice. And so has Republican Congressmember Liz Cheney, who finally said yes to marriage equality herself.
So there's a lot of analysis of the census figures going on, and as not surprisingly, they show a lot of extra stress that LGBTQ people are under.
But in the midst of this stress, we have a lot of allies. And this week, hundreds of students in a Texas town walked out of school in support of a lesbian teacher and LGBTQ visibility.
And more good news, Polish regions are dumping their anti-LGBTQ policies to open up aid from the European Union.
There's always a reason. You've heard about the new German presidential election. Well, as part of that, 2 trans women have been elected to the new German parliament.
And Scotland, Anne's ancestral home, is the first country in the world to require LGBTQ curricula in schools.
And they're putting it into practice with a lot of curriculum aids and things like that. The gayest play on Broadway in the 2019-20 season, which is what we're celebrating at the moment, won the Tony Award.
And HBO's new documentary, Nuclear Family, is a daughter's look back at her lesbian mom's fight with a gay sperm donor.
It's a story from a while ago, but the daughter has now made this 3-part documentary. So we will show you the trailer for that and talk to you about the details.
We start off in Switzerland. They passed marriage equality. They then had a referendum on it. And it won with 64% of the vote. There are people celebrating with a majority in all 26 Swiss cantons. It goes into effect July 1st, 2022. Now, they've had civil partnerships there since 2007. Marriage will allow gay couples to adopt children on an equal footing with heterosexual couples, facilitate citizenship for foreign-born spouses, and let lesbians use regulated sperm donation. More on that later. So it's progress. This was a country where women couldn't vote in all the cantons up until 1990.
Well, hey, we're a little backwards on stuff too, but they did take a while to meander around to marriage equality. They're not going to be the last ones, but we're very happy that Switzerland has now joined the parade, the slow stroll of nations moving towards marriage equality.
But the same voters, by the same margin, rejected a proposal to raise taxes on investments. So there's a certain conservatism there.
Well, that's where we're headed in this country, too. And another tiny step forward on marriage equality. A Republican Congresswoman from Wyoming, Mary Cheney, has now finally said, and that's her on the left, and her sister Mary on the right, Liz has now said in an interview on 60 Minutes that, yes, she was wrong to condemn her sister's marriage to her partner, Heather Poe, years ago, and she now understands that marriage equality is the right thing.
And Mary said, "I told you so."
Did she?
Yes, she did a posting welcoming the support.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, I mean, look, it's all political.
I think
Mary probably doesn't have much of a political future now in the Republican Party.
Liz, you mean?
I'm sorry, Liz, the Congresswoman from Wyoming.
Well, I don't think it's political because if it were political, she might also be supporting the Equality Act, which she in fact voted against very recently. And she also is voting against voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. She has not come around from her conservative positions. I think this is a personal announcement on her part of support for her sister. And by the way, she ended up this part of the interview by quoting her father, who said years ago, you know, freedom is freedom for everyone.
Whatever that means.
Yeah, well, at the time, it meant from him that he supported marriage equality.
While running on a ticket that was running in favor of constitutional amendments against same-sex marriage.
Well, that's the thing. And now we have people like, you know, the lovely Nicole Wallace and Tim Miller. And
we even had Barack Obama.
All these people who worked for George Bush as he won the presidency in 2004, won re-election by promoting bans on same-sex marriage state by state and drawing out conservative voters to do that. And yet they're saying, oh, isn't it about time that Liz Cheney came around on marriage? Well, isn't it about time that you said something about having worked for that heinous operation?
Well, Bush's campaign manager was Ken Mailman, a closeted gay man at the time.
Very closeted and supporting this strategy of promoting bans on same-sex marriage in the states.
We don't have the Equality Act. We're not going to get the Equality Act unless they get rid of the filibuster. By the way, Brian Brown of the National Organization for Marriage praised bisexual Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin for their opposition to ending the filibuster because it's blocking the Equality Act, explicitly praising them. And Rick Santorum did the same thing at a conference. He said, you need to thank Kyrsten Sinema. She's the one holding all this stuff up. And we have a video this week from the Human Rights Campaign about what happens when you don't have protection on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
Hurt people, heal people, help people. I'm healed, so I'm helping people. I'm speaking out for the Equality Act because I believe that voices, they can change people's perspective. I have lived from New York down to Florida. I've never had sustainable housing. It was couch surfing, it was shelters. I know what it is to sleep on a bench. I know what it is to sleep in an abandoned house. From my reality and from the people that I know in the Black trans community, that is our reality. Housing discrimination does not get the attention that it should. And then you add being a trans woman, then you add being Black. You just keep adding layers to discrimination. So it's been about a couple of years since I've been kicked out of my home in North Carolina. I had called the landlord to do some maintenance to the property that I was renting from him. So it started with him asking me about the transgender flag and exactly what the meaning behind the flag was. I thought that I was educating him about the trans experience. I thought that I was creating an ally by talking to him. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 days later, a week at most, he called and he told me, he said, well, I just wanted to inform you that I will be selling the property that you're currently living in and you need to evacuate the property within 2 weeks. I felt dehumanized. I felt worthless. I felt the same way I felt when I came to know my authentic self and my family rejected me. That feeling came back. Since coming to Atlanta, I have unpacked some that I have brought along with me from North Carolina. And I have a family that I have created. Now that I'm a homeowner, I don't have to fear being put out my home based on, you know, me living my authentic life. So I still have that flag as a banner of creating conversations, tearing down stigma, discrimination. So we need laws and policies to protect people of trans experience. They need to speak to people of trans experience. I am going to run this race and get to the finish line. And if I'm the only one there, I'm going to go back and bring some more people. We're all going to be at the finish line, and then we're going to pass the baton for those to come behind us.
should have introduced that woman as Queen, transgender woman from North Carolina, now in Atlanta. A fantastic testimony to what we need.
Exactly. And let's take a minute to talk about the fight that's going on in Congress right now that is blocking the Equality Act and everything else.
And threatening to send the world economy off a cliff.
Well, people ask me, what do you think is going to happen? And I say, I have to believe that they're going to pass something, that this is all just the normal kind of maneuvering that people engage in to try to get the most for what they want. But I look at what the Republicans are doing. The Republicans don't all agree on everything, and yet they are able to agree to have a united front of obstruction for anything the Democrats want. And yet the Democrats so far are not able to agree on a general principle of passing something. They are stuck in this.
Because Manchin and Sinema are beholden to pharmaceutical interests, oil interests, coal interests, those kinds of things.
Well, I gave Kyrsten Sinema a little too much credit last week when I said I thought she was looking to her constituents who might be more conservative. Then she goes and holds this fundraiser with all these corporate interests, and it is just so nakedly, blatantly self-serving in terms of money.
And as much as we are starting to hate them for this, there are other people in the Senate behind them who are letting them take the flak and happy that drug reform is not going to happen in terms of pharmaceuticals. They don't really want it to happen, et cetera. So come on.
Well, I think they have got to come to a point where they understand that they must put aside their desire to have everything they want, and I'm talking about both sides. I'm not talking about the progressives giving up a lot. I'm talking about the moderates giving up a lot. But we have to get to something.
I feel the same way, and we've often been categorized as inflexible ideologues, but we're not.
Andy and I don't get everything we want from each other. We compromise all the time.
We have to. Let's go to the census data on LGBTQ people. Not surprising, our mental stress increased under Trump. Mental distress is defined as 30 out of 30 days when your mental health is not good. In 2014, 7.7% of US and 4.8% of non-LGBTQ people cited that. In 2019, 12% of us and 5% of non-LGBTQ people. This is before, COVID had those kinds of months. So, and it's higher in the red states.
There are also surveys that show LGBTQ populations suffering more economically in the pandemic, which undoubtedly dovetails with this sense of stress. More LGBTQ people losing their jobs than non-LGBTQ, and other economic indicators. So it's just harder, and that leads to more stress and all the concomitant repercussions of that.
Right. At least there's some, people are paying attention to these problems. The Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics published a paper on young trans experience. And again, the results are not surprising. 1.8%, by the way, of high school students identify as trans. But this study looked at 17 countries, 91 studies. And, it's a small population. Everybody seems terrified of them, but, they go through hell just trying to meet medical providers. One of the kids said, "You treated me like a specimen when I told him I was trans." And this was just for an unrelated trans thing. So there needs to be education in that medical profession.
And across the board, I also read some testimony from a progressive medical provider reminding her colleagues that just because you think you're so hip to this doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing all the time, and you may be making assumptions that are not appropriate. So we all have to listen and learn and pay closer attention.
And we better pay closer attention to the loss of reproductive rights, which is going on in this country. So nationwide on October 2nd, Saturday, there will be marches across the country. In New York, we're going to start off in Foley Square at 2 o'clock down by Worth Street, but go to womensmarch.com/mobilize, and you can find one near you that you can attend. And we've really all got to turn out about this, if, you know, as a start to stopping it.
Well, I hope that that kind of pressure can have an effect. By the way, a footnote back on Kyrsten Sinema. The Democrats of Arizona are threatening to disavow her.
Yeah.
She doesn't get her act together, and presumably put up a primary opponent against her. As
140 advocacy groups already said they would do. They worked to get her in there, and she has totally betrayed them. So, Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah has introduced a bill to defund health research for transgender youth. Now, this is the kind of thing that is going to pass if the Republicans take back power. Biden can veto it while he's still there, but that's what they're up to.
Exactly, and we really are teetering on the edge. I was very sorry to hear about our loss of Sissy Farenthold this week, who was a fantastic progressive Democrat in Texas for many decades. Really ran for office. It was way ahead of the pack 50 years ago. So, you know, she was 94, she died, but she was a great, great leader and mentor to many.
And through gerrymandering, there may still be representatives like that coming out of Texas, but most of them will be hardened into right-wing districts. Now, we've got to remind you, they're already voting in Virginia for governor and the legislature right now, and it's somewhat tight for governor. And New Jersey is voting too for governor. And I watched the debate of the New Jersey gubernatorial candidates, and the Republican had to say, "Oh, I'm not for getting rid of Roe v. Wade," which was, you know, some progress.
Well, but who believes them anymore?
Right.
Who can we count on to be telling the truth? And why should we think that once he gains power that he is not going to fall under the thumb of the National Republican Party?
It didn't get past me.
Well,
Governor Murphy.
You get the point. California has added another state to the list that it will not fund its employees traveling to because of their passing a law about the medical license to discriminate, specifically against trans kids. Ohio.
Why don't they just get around to seceding? These states don't belong together. We don't belong together. I know that's a very controversial thing. People think it's hateful for me to say that sometimes, but we're not getting along.
Well, and we're not finding any compromise or solutions.
Right.
It's one thing if you can work out ways to coexist, but it's getting worse, not better. And I worry.
Sure, that you better. Tell us about Robert Lynn.
Well, Robert Lynn was an early gay leader in San Diego. He's just died at age 82. He was a lawyer. That's him on the right there with his husband, Cleon Howe, on the left. Bob Lynn was an early organizer of business and political organizations in the LGBTQ community, and he built a lot of coalitions. And we certainly talk about this. I don't think we give enough credit to people who 50 years ago were building these coalitions across lines of race and gender and bringing in allies, because the early organizers in the LGBTQ communities were working with a very small group of people and realized that they needed allies to get anything done. And they made these alliances that have fallen apart somewhat over the years. And now we think we're geniuses for reinventing this idea.
Well, that's the way work should always be done. And we should always be asking for support and giving support to causes. We certainly did that in New York in our coalitions. You had to, I mean, because you didn't have much power on your own.
Exactly.
Right. But let's bring our favorite story of the week, Irving, Texas. a lesbian.
All of the Dallas Cowboys.
Before you start rolling the tape, Rich, a lesbian teacher and a sponsor of the GSA at MacArthur High School was marched off campus in a dispute with the administration over her use of heart-shaped lesbian stickers on faces and clothes that teachers would show to their classes to say, I'm a person you can talk to, I'm saying.
Rainbow stickers.
Rachel Stonecipher, her name was.
Yeah.
She was a lesbian teacher. She asked for an explanation why they were cracking down. The new principal said they wanted the school to be safe for all students and to set a new tone. And then they started randomly questioning students who attended GSA meetings, interrogating them. So here's what the students did. They walked out, hundreds of them. This is just the start of what they're doing there.
They saw the teacher being marched across campus, and they just spontaneously took off out of their classes. They made these signs, they carried rainbow flags, and hundreds of them walked out of the school in support of this teacher.
In this scene, it looks like they're going back in, but no, they're opening up a door so they can let more kids out and join them.
Yes. It's so heartening to see this. Huge numbers. And there they're gathering on the football field to conduct their protest. We don't have any update about what's happened to the teacher.
Who hasn't been seen.
She's been disappeared under the bridge in Del Rio.
We hope to have an update for you next week.
But I have to think that kids like these outnumber the administrators, and that we are growing generations of smarter, better people who will ultimately make a better world, if I may be so cliched. Very heartwarming to see them doing that.
And in Indiana, the GSA there, the Gay Straight Alliance, at Pendleton High School, also where they didn't allow rainbow stickers. So the ACLU is suing them because the group is not allowed to advertise in the school, put up notices on bulletin boards, the way other groups can. School says, well, you're an unofficial group. You're not an official group. Well, the ACLU is going to change that. There's something called the 1984 Federal Equal Access Act that was passed, that many years ago. You have to do this. Congress passed it because they wanted religious groups to be able to meet. They have to let us meet as well. And
it's a story we've been telling for decades. The schools really are trying to, I don't know where they get the idea that they can get away with this, but there is an actual law that they created to allow religious groups, in spite of the separation of church and state, to have access to campuses and all the perks that come with being an official campus group. So they set the standard. But now these schools want to screw around with GSAs, and we're saying, hey, you're the ones who set this law.
Well, back in Texas, they said, you're not supposed to you can't use the classroom to transmit personal beliefs regarding political or sectarian issues. What are you supposed to talk about?
Well, this is not a political or sectarian issue. It's just not. It's about people's self-esteem. Right. All their explanations are empty.
And all of R. Kelly's explanations were rejected in Brooklyn, the rhythm and blues singer, R&B. He was found guilty on all 9 counts of racketeering and sex trafficking under the Mann Act, M-E-N-N, related to sexual abuse of 9 women and 2 men. Gloria Allred says he was the worst predator that she has ever pursued, and she went after Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein. He now faces life in prison. He exploited strangers, people who wanted music careers. Several of them were underage.
Andy, I'm guessing you did not see the Lifetime series Surviving R. Kelly. I, of course, watched every minute of it. It's horrifying. It's one of those things you couldn't look away from. He imprisoned people and tortured them and raped them and just abused them across the board, wouldn't let them see their families, literally locked them in and abused them physically, mentally, tortured them. And it is high time that he got punished for this.
And speaking of sexual predators, former President Donald Trump is suing his lesbian niece and the New York Times. He's using a lawyer who was general counsel for a parking garage company.
Well, that's all right, because the mayor of New York is going to replace Trump's management of the golf course in the Bronx with a company that does what?
Homelessness.
Homeless services. It's crazy. The mayor is not going to get away with it. Trump is going to win that case. That's my prediction. He's going to hang on to that lease for a long time.
Really? Interesting.
He has a contract to run the golf course through 2035. The mayor is trying to say that he's a criminal or whatever, and therefore has violated the morals clause of the lease. I don't think
it's too long to prosecute him for most of his crimes. Oh, come on. What about all the malfeasance of the Trump company that is under indictment now?
Well, I guess that's our best hope, but we haven't nailed him yet. So other than at the ballot box, so I'm not highly optimistic.
Okay.
But I am optimistic about the other thing that's happening this weekend. Saturday is the Reproductive Rights March. Sunday is the annual Pulaski Day Parade, celebrating Casimir Pulaski. And our pal Brendan Fay, longtime Irish rights activist, is joining with a Polish activist, Ronald Kraszewski of Homo Commando of Poland, to protest the Pulaski Day Parade's exclusion of LGBTQ groups. And Brendan says, come on, we all know Casimir Pulaski was intersex.
Right. They know it too, and the organizers of the parade. But, Razem, the LGBT Polish group, did march once. They didn't make a big deal about it. They just marched. And these Polish priests were so appalled, they banned them forever.
More on priests later.
And Poland.
Yes.
All right.
But you can join the protest by going to the Pulaski Day Parade on Sunday in New York.
If you have the exact place to go for the protest, let us know, and I'll put it in the email.
Okay.
All right. So we're into international news?
Yes.
Well, in China, the reactionary rectification movement of the government is accelerating a crackdown on what they regard as non-traditional sex roles, hitting LGBTQ people, feminists, etc. And this past week, a fan club for a boy band was shut down. And they're telling people you can only buy one album from a group a year or something like that. So there's a lot of resentment against this in Korea, which produces these K-pop groups. But they call the boys of K-pop sissy men.
Yeah, we know that. Meanwhile, in South Korea, the Seoul government has rejected an application by the Queer Culture Festival for official recognition as a non-governmental organization. They cited past indecency, nudity, and pornographic products made available at the festival. But the festival says you're just repeating claims of the anti-LGBTQ right wing without checking. None of this is real. You're just homophobic and you want to shut us down. South Korea is not particularly friendly to its sissy boy gay population.
And staying in that part of the world, in Thailand, the Constitutional Court has once again postponed a ruling on making marriage equality legal to December 14th. They might postpone it again. The case was brought by the Foundation for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Rights and Justice, and they're also pushing for Parliament to pass a bill about it.
Going back to Poland, four regions of Poland have repealed their LGBTQ free zone designations, which they did all in a rush to align with the Poland central government. But now they've realized that the EU is actually serious about withholding COVID recovery funds from them. So 4 of these regions out of what, more than 100 that passed this law have repealed it. And now they're pledging non-discrimination. They're talking
tolerance, fundamental rights and freedoms, although one of the regions said, but there's a special need to protect schools and families and the right of every person to self-determination. So they're kind of mixing up their language.
I support the right of every person for self-determination.
The EU is also blocking payments to Hungary. And these don't just have to do with LGBTQ rights. Because they keep passing laws in these countries that are contrary to EU laws.
Well, it was a big week in Hungary when Mike Pence showed up to attend a family conference. He was hailed for his conservative viewpoints. And next year in Budapest, they are going to be the site of the CPAC conference.
Well, Hungary is the model for establishing fascism without a war. You just use the laws or pervert the laws. And this is the model that Tucker Carlson and all these people on the right are using in the United States to establish the same fascism. Wake up!
Well, you lie to the people so that they are bamboozled into supporting this approach to life. And that is certainly what the right-wingers here do. They lie to the people, and that's how they have almost half the country supporting them.
Well, better news from Germany, which used to be quite the fascist country. In the elections this year that we just had this week, 2 trans women were elected to parliament. The first was Tessa Gonzorer, there she is, and the other one is Nike Slavic maybe. Both elected from the Green Party, which is expected to play a pivotal role in a 3-way coalition led by the winning Social Democrats, who bested Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats under a new leader. Slavic said, we're going from victims to standing on our own feet. And she wants pro-trans legislation. She wants lesbian I'm not reading my notes. She wants something there. And by the way, hate crimes in Germany are up 36% versus LGBTQ people there.
Well, I hope that the coalition they're forced to form to have a majority government is composed of progressive, more left-wing parties.
Well, the Social Democrats are certainly to the left slightly of the Christian Democrats.
And so is the Green Party, and I don't know who the third element would be, but I'm tired of these coalitions where one tiny right-wing party exercises control by threatening to leave and break up the majority coalition.
Okay.
In Kenya, the Film Censorship Board, you may remember a few years ago, banned the absolutely gorgeous lesbian movie Rafiki, which went on to huge international acclaim. And if you haven't seen it, you really should track that down, Rafiki. Now they have banned another gay movie, I Am Samuel, about a gay man, a construction worker. I haven't seen it, but just...
Well, it's about him and his partner, Alex. And so the government has labeled this the same-sex marriage agenda. It's directed by a Kenyan director who expected to be censored. He deals with a family also struggling about having a gay son. In Prato, Italy, Father Francesco Spagnisi, 40, a once well-regarded Catholic priest, was placed under house arrest for misusing $117,000 in church funds for drugs and male sex parties. He blamed a cocaine vortex for his misbehavior and then disclosed that he's HIV positive, though he's on retrovirals. He promised to return the money, but I don't know how much he's going to survive as a priest.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how, under house arrest, he manages to cobble together $117,000 to return to the church. The parishioners are not happy about this.
No, I should not think. Well, he was stealing from the collection plate, for God's sake.
Yeah. First, he just took the church funds, and then when they ran out, he went directly to the collection plate to get more.
It must be a temptation, all that cash lying around.
I don't think it was the only temptation. I think the drugs and the parties were the temptation.
There you go. They're addicted.
Meanwhile, in Scotland, we told you some time ago that they had passed a law for LGBTQ issues in the curriculum nationwide. They are now implementing that. They have produced a teacher toolkit, lesson plans, mandated inclusion in all areas, not just discrete LGBTQ lessons. But, you know, if you have a math problem, maybe you have a same-sex couple who are part of the math problem. Just
normalize it
throughout.
Normalize it, and they hope that it will also reduce bullying in the schools. There was a group that worked on this, and all 33 of their recommendations were taken. Now, in the United States, 7 states have curricular standards affirming LGBTQ people: Nevada, Illinois, Oregon, Connecticut, Colorado, California, New Jersey. What about New York? 4 have laws forbidding it: Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. The Biden administration issued guidance telling schools that anti-LGBTQ discrimination is a violation of Title IX, which covers sex discrimination.
Which is a way of trying to nationalize standards, but there's no rush to put us into the curricula. The school curricula are such a mess to begin with on all sorts of points that I'm not optimistic about us improving school curricula anytime soon.
A little optimism for the transgender people of India. The government is now going to include them under the classification, wait for this, other backward classes. That sounds bad, but it was set up for marginalized groups like the untouchables, the castes, all that stuff. So it will let trans people tap into a 27% set aside in education, institutions, and government jobs.
Okay. Any AIDS or health?
Well, I mean, we forgot to mention that now that Switzerland has done same-sex marriage, Liechtenstein is looking at it in Parliament today. They're kind of
yeah, but we have no results from there. Which
we'll tell you next week. And in Afghanistan, there's a San Diego activist, Namat Sadat, who came here as a child from Afghanistan. He is spearheading efforts to get 400 LGBTQ Afghans out, and so far has got 25, working with international organization, buying airline tickets, guiding them through the process. We'll send a link to what he's doing. And there's a new film about a gay refugee who fled Afghanistan as a child called Flee that's being screened now, and I'm looking forward to seeing that.
I think it's in the New York Film Festival coming up, but will be released later this year.
December.
Widely. Yeah. All right. AIDS news?
Do you have anything? I don't.
Nothing this week. I was querying you. All right, let's move on to...
We have integrated talk about AIDS into our discussions today, though.
We have. All right. And well,
the Tony Awards.
Yes.
You know, again, this was for the truncated 2019-20 season. And that gay 2-part play, The Inheritance, won Best Play for playwright Matthew Lopez and producer Tom Curtihy. That's Matthew by the mic and Tom over there on the left. Lopez noted that he was the first, and he used the term Latine playwright to win Tony. And he called for more Latine representation on Broadway. I asked him afterwards what stories he wanted to bring to stage and screen about Latine people, and he said he has more options now, and representation is foremost on his mind. Inheritance.
Well, it's interesting since The Inheritance is based on an E.M. Forster book,
right?
Which is not exactly a Latine. What is Latine meant to represent?
It's new. Everybody.
As opposed to Latinx or
Latine with an E apostrophe, you know, not apostrophe, E accent.
Accent aigu.
Yes,
in French.
Aigu. Right. Well,
that's French.
In Spanish. Yeah. Anyway, Stephen Daldry, also not Latine, a gay man long married to a lesbian, won for Best Director of that play. And Andrew Burnap won Best Actor in a play for playing one of the leads, Toby Darling, the character that Lopez has said is most like him. Burnap said last year that he considered himself a straight man before doing the play, which he said opened him up to being sexually fluid. And Lois Smith also won. She's 90, the oldest winner. She was in the play. She played the mother of a son who died of AIDS in part 2.
I remember her in the Robert Redford, Mia Farrow Great Gatsby movie.
I remember
a million other things.
She was with James Dean, I think, in, oh God, one of those.
Not East of Eden.
I might have been. And I think it might have been. And she was also Jack Nicholson's sister in 5 Easy Pieces.
Long career.
Slave Play with Gay Themes was the most nominated show of the year, and it was shut out completely. But it
12 nominations, no wins, but
coming back to Broadway.
Yes, and Jeremy O. Harris, who wrote it, was ecstatic anyway because it's gotten a lot of attention, and it is coming back to Broadway, which The Inheritance is not, I guess.
And they only had a couple of performances left, but who knows what'll happen now. LGBTQ choreographer Sonia Taye said, won for best choreography, and she called herself a brown queer Arab woman. That was for Moulin Rouge, which swept 10 of the awards, including Best Musical, and also won a long overdue Tony for the great Danny Burstein, who almost died of COVID after the show closed, and his wife did die of ALS. What a story, but he's back on the boards.
Now, what is this controversy about Jagged Little Pill having been mean to trans and non-binary people?
Well, there was.
This is the Alanis Morissette musical, which won some awards.
There's a woman in the cast who wanted to take time off for a medical thing, and she said they wouldn't let her. So, I mean, I can link to a story about that if people. It
sounded nasty. It sounded unkind and unnecessary to not let her out for the surgery she needed to have.
And after having Rob Shooter on the show, kindness is at the forefront of what we want. And the kindest person we know is our pal Julie Halston, who was given earlier the Isabel Stevenson Humanitarian Award from the Tonys. And here is a little of what she had to say as she accepted.
From the age of 9 to whatever age I am now, I wanted a life in the theater. It was my dream. My husband was my biggest supporter, and it is with him in mind that I now have another dream, to cure pulmonary fibrosis. Thank you for your support and encouragement for the realization of both my dreams. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's heavy. Oh my God! It's actually my Tony Award! Oh my God!
Oh, you're our God, Julie. Congratulations. Not too many other substitute co-hosts on Gay USA have won the Tony Award.
No, but Tom O'Neill, I believe, has brought a Tony Award to Gay USA. She won for volunteerism for her work on pulmonary fibrosis on behalf of her husband, who died a couple of years ago of it. She really is a fantastic human being and
very funny.
Very, very happy.
She's also a Broadway star. I mean, plays mostly supporting roles, and she was a huge off-Broadway star, and she's a comedian also. She does stand-up.
Yes, and a comic genius who just steals every show she's in.
She did a Facebook series during the pandemic, maybe she's still doing it, which really helped get us through. And she'd bring people on and talk, and it was just wonderful. Julie Halston.
Yes, so congratulations, Julie. And also getting us through these days, Lil Nas X. What a guy.
Well, there he is on the right there with Elton John in one of those Uber Eats commercials. And that's not the only one. And they are, can I use the word flamboyant?
Well, I guess that's what they have in common. But Lil Nas X's new album, Montero, has shot to #2 on the Billboard charts with, I think, 11 songs from the album on the charts, or 9 of 11 or something. He's just skyrocketed to fame and popularity. The New Yorker reviewed this new album and said, "You may have been thinking this was going to be something silly and pop, but in fact, this album is morose and self-searching. This is a very personal and revelatory album. I've heard some of it, not all of it, but I've liked very much what I've heard. And I also like the cover he did of Dolly Parton's Jolene. Jolene, Jolene, please don't take my man." It is the most appropriate and stunning twist on the song. And
we are going to include a link to it in our email. You could Google it and find it on YouTube, but we are going
Well, he did it for BBC Radio 1's Live Lounge, and it's a huge hit there. Everything this guy is doing at the moment is turning to gold, and well deserved, because he's being very thoughtful and very transparent and very out there in a way that is extremely helpful and progressive.
Also very groundbreaking is the first opera at the Metropolitan Opera by a Black composer. It opened at the Met on Monday. Fire Shut Up in My Bones. Shut Up. Is it Shut Up?
Shut Up in My Bones.
By Terence Blanchard. Based on a memoir by New York Times columnist out bisexual Charles Blow about growing up in Louisiana. That's Walter Russell III on the left playing him as a boy, and Will Liverman playing him as a man. Now, I hope they bring this to PBS.
Well, I hope so too. It got a rave review of the New York Times today from Anthony Tomasini, their chief opera critic, who said that the adult star Lieberman or Lieberman, however it's pronounced, was a revelation, and Tomasini just loved the opera through and through, and it's a huge breakthrough success for everybody involved with it. Long overdue, of course, but if the Met could do more new programming like this overall, and not just the same old operas year in and year out, I think they'd be doing better too. We also want to...
Speaking of breakthroughs, Bowen Yang on Saturday Night Live has been promoted to a full-time cast member. He's out gay. He's also a writer on the show. The out comedians Kate McKinnon and Punky Johnson are returning.
Yeah, and the show comes back this Saturday with Owen Wilson hosting and Casey Musgraves as the musical guest. Congratulations to Molly Bernard of the shows Younger and Chicago Med. She has married her partner, Hannah Lieberman, who's a lawyer with the Bronx Defenders program. Molly on the left, Hannah on the right. I think that is such a cute wedding picture. They were married in Brooklyn, and this is a great, joyous occasion. Congratulations to them.
Performer Billy Eichner is producing a comedy called Bros, B-R-O-S, where LGBTQ actors will play all the roles, including the non-gay ones. Eichner will play a leading role, and Luke McFarlane, who's out gay, will play his love interest. They'll all be out gay. It's a long overdue dream, he said, beyond just being a wacky sidekick, token queer, or a straight movie star's gay best friend. It's about two men with commitment issues who try to make a go of it. It's due next August. Eichner is also working on something called Ex-Husbands, a gay divorce comedy for Amazon. And we're going to include in our email a tape of on the gay best friend and that trope. And a viewer sent us. It's a very short, insightful film on the subject, and we will include a link.
All the best friends in the Billy Eichner Bros show seem to be men. I searched the cast and was having a hard time finding any women in that cast.
It's called Bros.
Yeah, well, come on. Update on Dancing with the Stars. JoJo Siwa remains at the top of the pack, now tied with another contestant, but still leading the pack, continuing on. You know, it's interesting. They do these intro videos for each dance segment, and it showed her at home with sort of babyish rainbow sparkles everywhere. She's 18 years old, but I have to say that for the first time in this dance this week, she was suddenly looking more adult sexy than I have seen her. I think that's beginning to break through. So we'll see whether they continue on that path.
We're going into LGBTQ History Month, October, and we're going to link in our email to a half-hour video on the groundbreaking of the American LGBTQ Museum in our email, including Billie Jean King, Andre DeShields, and trans writer Imara Jones.
And as we said in the intro to this Facebook broadcast, October 11th is National Coming Out Day, and PBS in its Independent Lens series is going to air the superb documentary Cured about the fight to have the American Psychiatric Association change its definition of homosexuality 50 years ago. And our guest next week will be Bennett Singer, one of the makers of the film Cured. So we'll look forward to talking to him about that. But meanwhile, make a note, October 11th, PBS, Independent Lens, Cured.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the nuclear family. This is a new documentary on
three parts on
HBO, made by Rai Russo-Young. She had lesbian moms and a sister, Robin Young and Sandy Russo. They decided to conceive in the late 70s, early 80s. They used gay sperm donors recommended by friends in San Francisco who lived across the country. But oh, what a tangled web we weave when we do practice to conceive. That's kind of what it's about. And we have the trailer for that.
Okay, just briefly describe your relationship to Rai.
To Rai, you mean you?
I always describe my parents as Juliet and Juliet. Like they described the moment they met.
It was immediate. Gabon. Kaboom. We lived in the West Village. It was very gay.
We were creating a new world of gay liberation. Your parents were part of that.
Two same-sex parents and children. I don't think anybody even thought that that happened.
We wanted gay men as donors. No rights, no responsibilities.
Smart, tall, dark, and handsome. As a gay man, Tom was attracted to the idea of helping lesbians have families.
We used an artichoke hearts jar.
Fill it up.
Insert it.
And then they had us. Voila.
In so many ways, we were this traditional family.
We'd visit Tom several times a year.
It was clear that Tom fell in love with you.
What I remember vaguely is that there was some tension between the adults.
As parents, we were a little afraid.
It just felt like he was forgetting our promises to each other and what this was all about.
Where do you come off interfering with our family?
I was being sued for you.
It was unheard of for a family like yours to be fighting a paternity lawsuit.
You were intertwined with his sense of who he really was.
He just wasn't your family.
Clearly he was some kind of big deal in my life, because here we are 30 years later talking about it.
It wouldn't be the family we wanted, we planned, we struggled for.
After all this time, I'd never been able to truly understand my feelings.
Right? What happened between us? There's always two sides to any story. Maybe you've only heard one.
I will say that I found it very absorbing.
Well, we've seen the first part, and you can catch up with it repeating on HBO or on HBO Max or on demand. There are two more parts the upcoming Sundays. It's an hour for each part. Yes, it's absorbing and it's complicated. There are some real conflicting issues here about kids' right to know their biological parents, the lesbian mom's rights to have their own family, and they did litigate this in the 1980s and 90s, and it established some landmark legal precepts. But the complications of it, the nuances of it, are what make this a compelling story.
I think they didn't have a written contract, as Donald Trump did with his niece.
Well, they had an agreement, and then the agreement was breached by the.
Write it down. Most people, you know, I think most people who use sperm donors use anonymous donors from sperm banks now. This was done rather casual. I
don't know what the numbers are. I think that sounds like an overgeneralization. We don't really, unless you have the figures, I don't know that we know.
I will come back with them next week.
Please do. But I think the fact is that there are all sorts of nuances to this, and there aren't easy answers to it. And that is what makes this something worth watching and contemplating.
The people I knew in those days who had kids were gay dads and gay and lesbian moms who
I had two stepsons at that point. From 5 years earlier, I was with them for 17 years. I had brunch with one of them this last Sunday. It was being done, but my partner was someone who'd had the sons in a previous heterosexual marriage, but everybody worked it out. It wasn't something contentious. So there are all sorts of different angles to this.
And of course, up until recently, gay and lesbian parents had to go through, the partners had to go through these second parent adoption things. They made it so difficult and expensive. But now,
and that's the part of this. If the biological father wins paternal rights, does that then preclude the second mom from having legal rights? You know, we've talked about cases on this show where 3 parents are recognized as legal parents, and I think in a case like this, that is what you want to end up doing. You don't want to cut anyone out of whatever.
Well, Anderson,
anyway, that's Nuclear Family on HBO, and something that is fascinating. There's also a lot of fascinating stuff coming up in NewFest, the New York LGBTQ Film Festival, which is playing October 15th through 26th, and both online and in person. So you can go to newfest.org to get tickets for online or in-person screenings. Check that out.
And speaking of cutting off, Anderson Cooper's cutting off his son from his fortune. He's written this book about his very rich family that squandered their wealth, and he says that's not the way to go.
Well, there are nuances to that too. Congratulations to India Moore of Pose, who is booked for the Aquaman movie sequel coming out a year from now. And that is about it for us. We have only 10 seconds.
See you next week, I hope, with
Bennett Singer and Cured. Bye.